For many of us, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It's a ritual of coffee, toast, or cereal that gets us going for the hours ahead. A routine so deeply ingrained in our modern lives that it feels timeless, almost essential. But if you were transported back to ancient Rome, that whole scene would seem completely alien. In fact, for some influential Romans, the very idea of eating a big meal in the morning was considered bizarre and even unhealthy. The ideal, especially among the upper classes, was to build your day not around 3 meals, but just one. So, why did some Romans look down on breakfast? And if they weren't all eating in the morning, what did a day of food actually look like in one of history's greatest civilizations? The answer reveals a world where your first meal of the day said everything about who you were. If you read the works of elite Roman writers and moralists, you'll see the day was structured around a single main event, the cena. This was the big meal, an affair that ideally began in the late afternoon. For the wealthy, whose mornings were often filled with political and social duties rather than physical labor, business was meant to be wrapped up early. The afternoon was for leisure, visiting the baths and preparing for the cena, which could be anything from a simple family meal to an hours-long banquet with guests. This focus on one large evening meal was a cultural ideal. Writers like the philosopher Seneca praised a simple lifestyle, and Pliny, the elder, was known for eating light, simple meals in the custom of his ancestors. Eating too much, or too often, was seen as a sign of gluttony and poor self-control. Now, there was a morning meal, the ientaculum, and a midday snack, the prandium. But in the perfect world of the Roman elite, these were supposed to be little more than quick, frugal bites. The ientaculum might just be a piece of bread, maybe dipped in wine or olive oil, with a bit of cheese. The prandium was often just a quick, standing meal of cold leftovers. The real business of eating was saved for the cena. This wasn't just a custom. It was backed up by the medical science of the day. To get why they were suspicious of multiple meals, you have to understand Greco-Roman medicine, which was dominated by figures like the physician Galen. Ancient medical theory was built on the idea of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your health depended on keeping these in balance. And the main way you influence that balance? Your diet. Galen and others imagined the stomach as a kind of internal cooking pot. They believed the body's natural heat literally cooked the food you ate, breaking it down in a process they called pepsis, or digestion. According to this thinking, the stomach needed plenty of time to finish its work without being interrupted. Loading the stomach with a new meal before the last one was fully cooked was thought to be a bad move. It could mess up the whole digestive process, create an excess of bad humors, and throw the body out of whack. So, for an educated Roman following the best medical advice, eating one main meal seemed like the most logical and healthiest way to live. This wasn't a universal ban on breakfast, but for those concerned with health and self-discipline, it was a powerful argument for taking it easy in the morning. But let's be real. That elite ideal was a world away from the reality for most people in the Roman Empire. The vast majority of the population couldn't afford to structure their day around one leisurely afternoon meal. For them, breakfast wasn't a moral issue. It was a practical necessity. Manual laborers, farmers, and artisans needed energy for a long day of physical work. It's very likely that many started their day with a more substantial ientaculum. Bread, yes, but maybe with some bean pottage, cheese, or whatever was available to fuel their bodies. We see evidence of this practical approach all over. Kids on their way to school might grab a quick bite from a bakery. And Roman soldiers, the backbone of the empire, certainly weren't skipping meals on campaign. Their diet was built on a foundation of grain, supplemented with whatever was available. Fighting on an empty stomach was hardly a recipe for success. Children, the enslaved, and anyone whose life was dictated by labor ate when they could and as much as they needed. The philosophical thoughts of an aristocrat on the virtues of a single meal meant very little to a dock worker in Ostia or a farmer in Gaul. In truth, the rule of skipping breakfast was a luxury belief. So, what did a day of eating actually look like? Well, it depended entirely on who you were. For a wealthy Roman senator, the day might begin with that very light ientaculum. After a morning of business and a trip to the baths, he'd prepare for the cena. This could be a highly theatrical event. A typical cena might begin with the gustachio, an appetizer course with things like eggs, olives, and shellfish, often served with mulsum, a honey-sweetened wine. Then came the main courses, the prime mense, which could involve an astonishing variety of dishes: roasted boar, exotic birds, and rich sauces. The meal would wrap up with the secundae mensae, a dessert course of fruit and nuts. This wasn't just a meal. It was a social ritual designed to show off wealth and status. Now, contrast that with a craftsman living in a crowded apartment building or insula. His tiny apartment probably didn't even have a kitchen. For him, food was a totally different experience. His breakfast and lunch were likely simple: coarse bread, maybe some cheese. For a hot meal, he'd go to a thermopolium. Archaeology in places like Pompeii has uncovered dozens of these Roman fast food counters. These shops had large clay jars sunk into a counter, which held hot, ready-to-eat food. That could range from thick grain porridges like puls to various stews. Here, for a few coins, he could get a filling, hot dinner. His diet was built on grains and vegetables. Meat was a rare treat. A key flavor for almost everyone was garum, a powerful fermented fish sauce. Of course, the quality varied wildly, from the basic stuff for the masses to refined, expensive versions for the rich. This sharp contrast between the lives of the rich and the poor is a constant theme in Roman history. If you're fascinated by what life was really like for everyday Romans, beyond the emperors and gladiators, consider subscribing for more stories from the ancient world. And let us know in the comments. Would you prefer a lavish Roman cena or a quick stop at a thermopolium? So, did ancient Romans really refuse to eat breakfast? The answer is a classic: it's complicated. The popular image of a breakfast-skipping Roman comes from the ideals of a tiny, wealthy elite who valued self-restraint. Their writings created a powerful story, but it hides the reality for millions of others. For the vast majority of people in the Roman world, the workers, the soldiers, the poor, a morning meal was a practical part of the daily grind. The evidence from bakeries and food stalls tells a clearer story than the philosophical texts of Seneca. It shows us a world where food was a constant sign of your place in society. What you ate, when you ate, and where you ate, it defined your existence. That simple morning meal, then, wasn't just about food at all. It was about status, labor, and the vast, complex reality of life in the Roman Empire.